I can't tell if it's hello. It seems like it's working. Oh, no, no, no. Is it? No, it can't be. Okay. Yeah. Oh shit. It has been going. Okay. All right. So what is this? It
Hello?
has been going. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that's not muted. Anyway, um so I forgot about the introduction. So I ended up reading the introduction in chapter 1 and yeah, that's it. I'll just get into it. I've got my copy here. I'm worried I'll forget something, but hopefully not. Um, the introduction, very simple, very brief. It tries to establish that the book will be looking at American history through the lens of indigenous people. Um, it has it does something here with the. It says that in between 1492 and 1776, the population of North America went from about 8 million to 4 million. And then later, it said that I'm not going to be able to find it, but it said that the Americas had like tens of millions of people. Yeah, it said that the Americas were inhabited by 75 million people in 1492. So that means that North America just had 8 million people in it, and South, Central America, and the Caribbean, they collectively had 67 million. I don't know. That seemed off to me, but I'm just going based off of what I've seen in the introduction and then later in chapter 1, I think is where it covers that. Um Not much else here. It also doesn't talk about Cortez very much. It doesn't talk about Pizarro at all. So it only deals with Spain's chapter 1 deals with Spain's influence in like the United States basically. So oh god, let's see. Um so it basically lays out that after the Aztec Empire fell, the section that Mexico and New Mexico, northern Mexico, around that area, that became like sort of a borderlands where the Spanish Empire ended and indigenous people started to begin, basically. And man, there was a lot in there was a bit in there about a Pueblo revolt. There was another war that took place. I haven't structured this very well at all because, man, there was also there were two explorers, De Soto and Coronado. Coronado, I believe, checked out the western United States. Some of his maps would be used later by Lewis and Clark. And De Soto, he went up into the Appalachian Mountains thinking he would come across another Incan Empire, which was hilarious to me. He thought he would come across another Incan Empire, seemingly just because he came across mountains that were in the Americas. That's those two things have like no connection to each other. That's like thinking that the Alps and the Urals are like equally rich because they're both mountainous areas in Europe. It doesn't. I don't know what the math was there, but he did not find like any rich empire like Pizarro did in I believe what is now Peru. Um, there's another part here. There's a lot of shit that I highlighted that I'm just not gonna be able to get to because I didn't structure this properly. But after the after one of the Pueblo revolts, they ended up pushing the Spanish out, and then asking for them basically to come back in under more generous terms to them. And because before, the Spanish were suppressing the Pueblo people and, uh, basically like trying to replace all of their religious beliefs with the Catholic Church and with building churches and so on and so forth. Um, but the Pueblos kicked them out and then asked them to come back in under better circumstances because the Pueblos were being attacked by Indians, I believe, further to their north. So that was interesting, and that's going to give us a glimpse into how the Spanish dealt with indigenous people. It was more of from what I understand, it was more of a give and take than it will be with when the Americans start dealing with indigenous people. When Americans start dealing with indigenous people, it'll be more of a take and a take. There's not a whole lot of giving. Which isn't to say that the Spanish were like kind or whatever to the indigenous people. There's I forget the other one, but Cortez apparently sicked dogs on indigenous nobles who refused to submit to him. So it's not the Spanish weren't kind to or weren't better with the indigenous people out of the goodness of their hearts. It was just the political reality that they were steeped in. But anyway, later, well, I shouldn't say later because the Spanish had indigenous allies since at least Cortez. Since Cortez moved in and he defeated the Aztec Empire with the help of his indigenous allies, and the Spanish would continue to use indigenous allies throughout. There was another revolt or another war in here between the Spanish and the indigenous people, but the Spanish had indigenous allies with them, even against other indigenous people. Oh shoot! I literally had it and I put it away because I didn't think I'd need it. It also details this is referring to the Spanish and their allies. They suffered joint victories as well as defeats, including the devastating loss on the plains in 1720, known as the Villasur Massacre, in which a joint French-Pawnee force from New France routed New Mexico's leading military unit under the command of New Mexico's Lieutenant Governor Pedro de Villasur. Yeah, like it's laying out like the burning of churches when the Pueblos revolted, a massacre the Spanish committed at Acoma. I believe it was the Spanish massacre at Acoma. Anyway, there was the relationship with the church was pretty interesting. It lays out in here that there was one Spanish priest, I believe, who tried to push for better treatment of the indigenous people, but at the same time, this doesn't really like work. You can't look at that and just view the church as like a benevolent force in their lives, because the whole time the church is benefiting from the slave labor of the indigenous people. The church is working with the Spanish government, and so that's why they would end up in the Pueblo revolt. That's why they would end up burning down churches, and I believe killing priests is in there too. It's because the church is working alongside the Spanish government. The two are like not one and the same, obviously, but they're hand in hand, and you can't cleanly separate one from the other here. Here, let's see. Yeah, see here. Accustomed to their own political, ceremonial, and spiritual authorities, the Spanish drew sharp divisions between secular and religious power. unlike the Pueblo's hosts, whose joint religious and political institutions structured everyday life. This distinction and this contrast would shape the daily negotiations of Pueblo communities with Spanish rule. The missionaries expected Pueblo labor for the construction of churches and the homes of religious leaders. They suppressed Pueblo ceremonies and religious life and condemned Pueblo ceremonial structures known as kivas, as well as their prayer sticks, dances, and offerings of cornmeal. So, like I said, that just goes into what I said, where the indigenous people viewed them as, again, just being one and the same, of working together, of collaborating. And to a large extent, they simply were. The church was coordinating with the Spanish government. It does talk about Potosi. So if you don't, in case you're not in the know, Potosi was a silver mine in Peru, and it was one of the biggest. It was one of the biggest places to get silver in the world at this time. By 1700, the largest silver mine in the Americas, Potosi in Peru, elevation 13,000 feet, was among the largest cities in the world, with more than 100,000 inhabitants, indigenous and Spanish. They also touch on the Aztec Empire, which they call something else. I believe they're trying to use its a name that the Aztecs would more recognize. They don't call it the Aztec Empire. I believe they call it the Nahua Empire, but I can't find the spot I saw that in right now. This will be better structured in the future. I'll take notes on a piece of paper. But because the way I'm doing this now is garbage. Oh yeah, this is De Soto and Coronado, the two Spanish explorers I laid out earlier. De Soto seemed to be the crueler of the two, from what I've read in here. He orders a massacre at Nilco, and both of their journeys seem to have disturbed life in the areas they went through a lot. In fact, there's this word, this new term that I had never heard before. I believe it's called ethnogenesis, and it's when a bunch of different groups of people get scattered, and then they slowly start to coalesce and create like a new people, a new like social structure that's different than the ones that they were cast out of. I believe that's what it's called. Again, I can't find it now. Notes. If I had notes right now, that would be kick ass. But here we are. I think that's it. There's the Mixton War. The Mixton War is what it was called, not the Pueblo Revolt. There's the Pueblo Revolt and the Mixton War. It does a pretty good job of explaining the Pueblo Revolt, in my opinion. Not a very good job at understanding the Mixton War. It does call it, here it is. One episode, the Mixton War, became one of northern Mexico's most decisive military campaigns and the most threatening revolt in colonial Mexico before the independence rebellions of 1810. So that was interesting. That would make them the biggest revolts for the next 200 years. No, like 250 closer. I really want to find, it is Nahua. They call, I'm butchering the pronunciation, but they call the Aztec Empire the Nahua Empire in here. Nahua. It is ethnogenesis. Old societies rapidly regrouped into new ones in a process scholars now refer to as ethnogenesis, the creation of new ethnic communities and social identities out of the remains of former societies. The last thing that I want to get to, well, actually, there's two last things. But the second to last thing is it alludes to the northern indigenous people, or the people who were to the north of the Pueblos, and how they were being attacked by other indigenous people who were on horseback. I forget what he calls them. He calls them like the equestrian groups or something like that. But anyway, I think that's foreshadowing. It mentions the Comanches a little. I think it mentions the Apaches, but don't quote me on that. Okay, here it is. Yeah. So this is the part. This is the last part, and it's towards the end of the chapter, and it's the part I want to leave out on, or try to leave out on. I don't really know how to close all this. Anyway, I'll try to leave out on this. It's the part that best explains Spanish rule. Although inherently violent and subordinating, colonialism across the Southwest was never complete or totalizing. At times, it was as generative as it was destructive. After the Pueblo Revolt, and for the century that followed, after the Pueblo Revolt and for the century that followed, no single group was supreme in the Southwest. Power required constant negotiation between and among communities. So, yeah, that perfectly lays it out, because in the future, I don't think we'll see a lot of communication and, the give and take between, the Americans and the indigenous Americans in future chapters.